we will call our April 30th special work session to order. Good afternoon, I'm Chris Haggerty, your board chair. It's 1 o'clock and we are convening our special Board of Education work session to continue our deliberations on the budget. You know that we have a statutory deadline for completing a budget, passage of a budget, that'll then be sent to our Wake County Board of County Commissioners. And our current schedule for that is to bring that budget for a vote at our next regular board meeting, which will be Tuesday, May the 7th. All right? There was a lot of discussion last time. I know there were some supplemental questions that board members had. Staff has worked very hard to provide you answers to those questions. You've seen different scenarios that have been presented to you in Assembly. And there have been additional materials that might have come to you via email responsive to individual questions. Mr. Nieder, what I'd like to do to start the meeting is, rather than go through the presentation, I want to go through and call on each board member to offer for no more than 5 minutes, and I'll be keeping time, their target number and generally what they want to prioritize in terms of anything that they would add to the budget or anything that they would take out of the budget. And then we'll come back around to you and then we'll go from there. Okay?
Like 1 minute.
All right. Well, before we begin, we do have everybody here except for Ms. Johnson-Hostler, who let us know that she was going to be traveling out of state today. Many of you may have had an opportunity to talk to her individually, so you know kind of her recommendations and where she was. I feel awkward putting words in her mouth or speaking for her not being here. But she has had a chance to give her input as well. So, as I just said, I'd like to go around the table and just sort of see where everyone's targets and their priorities are. And I was half joking, but more than really half serious, that I am keeping time recorded on this so that we do have time for a full discussion. So let's just start with Mr. Hershey. What are your thoughts right now on a total budget target and anything in particular you would add, take out, or other priorities for you?
So based on what Mr. Nieder sent out at the end of last week and without commentary, my final budget number that I'm going to start off with is 61 million as the additional request, 61.8 million. Undo the parking fee, so that's an additional 213,000 that we had back. I'm at 3% for certified supplement pay, which I'm estimating, but staff will have to correct, to be about $5.8 million. Non-certified salary increase to $17.75, which is $4.1 million. Bus driver pay to 20 at $1.1 million. Do away with the extended care support, which subtracts $2.5 million. I support the move to keep the behavioral health support on Medicaid, which subtracts $1 million. I have no changes to building subs. I, of course, support flag football, which is $138,000. The Narcan, if we need to, as a backstop, which is at the most $35,000. I support the ESSER funding changes, which I gather to mean that we have additional ESSER funds that we will apply to positions, which subtracts $4 million. The cost of my changes on top of the superintendent's budget is $4.8 million. I'm sorry, it's $3.4 million. I was reading my wrong column. Again, to give me 61.805 million and some change.
All right, and do you have any commentary priorities with that?
Nope.
All right. And those are numbers that you can share with Mr. Nieder and the budget staff as well?
Yes.
Right?
And I'm going to be...
So if you didn't get it written down, he has all that.
I've got a pretty spreadsheet. I'm going to be keeping track of all the numbers that people throw out there.
Okay. Thank you, Sam.
Yep.
Ms. Edmonds, are you ready now, or would you like me to come back?
Yeah, no, I'm ready. Based on what was sent to us by Mr. Nieder, I am leaning toward option 2, which is an additional ask of $63.5 million. It, again, eliminates the parking fee. It does a 4% increase to the supplement. It gets non-certified staff to $17.75. We're able to keep flag football, which we've gotten a ton of feedback about. And let's see. Oh, the $20 per hour for bus driver pay are some of the highlights.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Edmonds. Dr. Wren?
I've been reviewing some of this, and as well as some of what Mr. Hershey shared with us. I do agree with option 2 under Mr. Leaders with some modification. The one thing that I reviewed from a prior work session was there were some 3 senior administrative positions that amount to $356,760 that I would prefer to hold off on for this coming budget, but maybe we can kind of look at it in a future year. And we had talked about having a kind of a study to talk about kind of what is actually needed in terms of the kind of roles in our central office staff. And so I think that I would like to hold off on the expenditure for that, and then that'll give us a little bit more money. I didn't have a full number to give you, but I would be inclined to do the same thing as Mr. Hershey had mentioned earlier about the parking fees, and as well as the doing away with the extended care support, and then the ESSER fund, continue to use the ESSER fund up until the September.
What was that number again for the administrative positions? I just wanted to...
$356,760.
Please, Ms. Edmonds.
So for the record and for those listening, I think I said in my comments that it eliminates the parking fees, or I phrased it incorrectly. What I meant is that it removes the reduction in the parking fees that we had discussed. So just to be clear.
It's not an elimination
My
of the fee.
apologies.
It's
Yes,
an elimination
yes.
of the proposal for reduction.
Yes, I think I said that wrong.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Ms. Caulfield?
So I wanted to okay with the bus driver at $20 an hour. Excuse me. Wanted to eliminate the need for the learning lab or extended lab. The teacher increase, I had a 4.5%. And I mean, I'll settle with the 4 if that's what everybody wants to do, but I felt that would be better. I wanted to see the helps in there as in the budget. I know that we had talked about that. I think that affects literacy, and I feel one of the things I'm concerned about is if we try to find a place to add it or try to find money later, it means that we're going to find money that we don't know. It's uncertain how many schools that's going to affect. And with having the pilot the first year, the second year funding more schools, I was hoping that we would expand it, not hopefully find, so I would prefer to see that in the budget. I wanted to, the 13.8 million, excuse me, to keep the behavioral health specialists for the guidance counselors, psychologists, and social workers, and the women's flag football also for 138, I think it was, and the permanent subs and master pay. So I was okay with keeping all of those. I don't have a number. I was just hoping that we could possibly discuss where we could move from some of the other things that are there. So that's more of my concern. But these that we were listing and talking about today that we're putting on this sheet that Mr. Nader put together for us, so thank you for that, I feel these are priorities. I'm not necessarily okay with just raising the number, just to fill in some more things. So that's my comments.
So, and I just want to be clear, did you have like a target number you were looking at as a cap I know you said there's
I
some
don't
things
have
that
a
you
target number, and I
wanted to
don't
cut.
mind raising the ask. I just want to make sure that it is going towards all of our special needs. We still have to address our HVAC and our building issues. We still have missing positions. I agree with Dr. Ng that we should hold off on filling some positions, and I guess staff would be able to see which ones are most needed now and which ones we could hold off on. But going through the list, I do see that we have quite a bit of vacancies. So some of those things, depending on how long they've been vacant, maybe we don't have to fill them.
Okay, sounds good, thank you. Ms. Rice?
Okay, great. So I am for our supplement, our certified supplemental pay, I prefer 4.5. I also prefer the $18 an hour with a 4% minimum. I also support the $20 per hour for our drivers. My commentary around that is, if we pay people, we continue to get qualified staff to focus on what's most important around this table, which is student achievement. And that's what's most important to me. I'll just simply say that is the highlight of everything for me. I am okay with whatever other adjustments we have to make. I just really need for staff to be paid, and as well as the professional development parts that they need to have with their employment to be able to effectively help and support students academically. The other part is I understand the part about the Narcan in schools, and I'm very supportive of everything mental health. I'm just hoping that our partners within human services and things like that will take care of that particular piece. And I think that will be a good integrated partnership with that. The other part that I have is while I am very supportive of flag football, my child has even participated in it, and flag football helps families like mine, where my son got to play because he couldn't do contact sports because of his sickle cell disease. That is very helpful. I do still have to lean toward paying my staff first. But if we can put that in there, I'm okay with it. If our funding sources will support it, but I do need to know that staffing is a main priority for me in academic supports. I think the other thing that I needed to say is the extended care. Is that the
Learning lab.
The learning labs? Yeah. I think that if we pay our staff and train our staff, right, in the equitable places in which they need that professional development, I don't think that we may need that. And I think that if we pay our bus drivers a decent wage to put into practice some of the challenges they may incur while driving the buses, I think that we can eliminate that learning lab in that process. I think that's about, those were my main highlights, but I think for me at the end of the day, just as a sum, is, and I have here I should believe we should keep the parking fees as is. I think we should just not use the decrease right now just because we're in a tight season, a tight budget, and I think that's something that we need to, keep in mind, these great things that we're talking about. But right now, we understand our economics within our county, and I need for us to be able to help our teachers live in Wake County as close to our students as possible. And so I'm just going to keep stressing that I need them to be paid so they don't have the burden of traveling so far to support our students, to be exhausted an hour of driving before you even get to school and then going home. And I think that if we support their well-being, I think we'll see some changes within our district. And I think I'll leave it as there. I think I've said
Okay.
that for the most part.
Did you have a range in terms of a final number?
I don't have necessarily a final number, but I can tell you what I prefer not to do. I prefer not to exceed over 50, 58, or $60,000. I prefer not to exceed those limits. And I say that with this in mind. If we tax our revenue, our local revenue stream, with exacerbating the numbers that we need. These are needs, right? And we know only our state can reduce these needs to help us. My fear is that if we increase this number so much where the county cannot meet the need, it's going to turn around and tax the very citizens we're giving the money to help them. And so my fear is taxing citizens or giving them a pay increase only for them to turn around and be taxed again, and the money is still taking away from them. So I just want us to, as we talk around this table, to keep that in mind, that at the end of the day, somebody has to pay for everything. And they're already strapped with financial resources. And I just don't want to make a number so high that the county can't reach, or if they choose to, it goes up too high and tax our families all over again.
Okay.
And that's going to hurt families too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Swanson.
And I agree with what was been laid out with my colleagues so far. It's no secret I have been advocating for us to remove the Learning Lab, so I'm going to keep that one at the forefront at the table to see those dollars going towards compensation. I will support the 4%, of course, the $20 minimum for bus drivers, but my concern is with the $20 minimum. Our bus drivers will be paid extremely more than our non-certified staff, and so I'm concerned about that. But again, I understand that if we don't have drivers to get our students to school, then the learning can't take place. So I do believe in compensation, but I'm just concerned about the potential gaps. The number that I will stay close to is around the additional $60 million. I think Mr. Hershey's was around 61 or 62. That's something along those lines I'll support. But I also think that this is the duty of the state legislature. We can do a 4% increase, or 4.5% at the local level, but if the state was to increase the pay for our teachers, then our supplemental pay would not necessarily be needed. So as they're in short session, I would encourage folks to continue to reach out to the state legislature, because if the state did their due diligence and compensated our staff, we could have conversations about additional programs that we would love to see, like the help, expanding the helps. So I do believe that the burden falls on our state. I also would like to see the study that Dr. Ng mentioned in the near future as well, so that can help us get a baseline of what we need. So my number is going to be in between that 63 and 60.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Ms. Mahaffey.
In looking at the options provided by Mr. Nader, I really, appreciate the fact that it was broken down and kind of going above and beyond what the 18 would look like and what that ask would look like. I think option 2 is probably the one that will be easier based on hearing the comments from my colleagues to get to. I realize that that does not reach the full 18 that folks are asking for, but it does protect the 4% increase to the local supplement for staff. I agree with what Mr. Swanson said about this ultimately being the state's responsibility, and our local taxpayers are having to bear the burden of it, along with a re-eval. That is where we're at. And so option 2 for me is the one that kind of hits all of those points. I appreciate adding the protection of flag football in there, and I would love to see the additional monies for Narcan, but I do also believe that there are ways to find that through partnerships. And so I'm hopeful that we can find that $35,000 with other local government or governmental resources or a private partnership.
Thank you. So as we look at the different numbers that Mr. Nader and staff have provided, and then additional suggestions that we've pointed out, as I've thought about it, the thing that comes back to me is where we started, which is that the superintendent and his staff put together and recommended a budget for us of about $58 million. And as you know, we did a budget exercise at our retreat where we were looking at different proposals. And between the retreat and the actual superintendent's proposed budget, we saw that we had less revenue coming in than we intended. And I think that really, I don't want to say upset, but I think a lot of us, well, it upset our expectations for what was available and what we could do. But if you'll remember, even when reports of that hypothetical discussion and that budget exercise got out there, we did receive feedback from our friends on the county commission and the commissioners about the size of our ask and what might be available. And we know that simply funding what we're required to fund from what's mandated by the state is going to require a tax increase. So asking for what we need to support our schools and our students above and beyond what we're simply required to do is going to require a tax increase. It's just a matter of how large the commission is willing to take on. To me, as I look at it, if we ask for more money than they are willing to fund, then a lot of this discussion is academic because we won't get it. And we'll simply come back and we'll simply have to cut to get back down where it is. So in my mind, I don't think we can get too far above the superintendent's recommendation. But I do believe all of us around the table have looked at the budget, and I think I've heard every one of you express there are things you would like to see that better reflect your values. And so as I looked at it, I had a lot of very similar thoughts on what we could do to increase this. I believe we made a commitment with our multi-year plan for compensation. And I believe even in hard years, we have to honor that commitment or it's not a commitment. So I think we can get a 4% certified supplement to the pay. And I believe we can do the non-certified salary increase as well. I'm not sure exactly how high that can be. I had it at about 3.5 million, not quite as far as I think some of you. I was looking at maybe 17.5 as opposed to 17.75, but math was never my strongest subject, so I'll leave that to the rest of you. Again, bus driver pay. I think that's important. I think Mr. Swanson raises a valid point, and this is a challenge we've run into a lot, which is every year that we've talked about raising the budget and raising salaries from some of, like one class of employees, we hear from other classes of employees. But eventually, we have to look at the situation we're in, and it doesn't matter if you worked all day in the vineyard or half the day in the vineyard. You worry about your salary, and we do what's necessary to take care of getting students to school on time. So I would pay bus drivers, I would take that salary up to $20 an hour. To do all of this, though, and still keep our budget ask reasonable, I agree with what some of you have said, that the extended care support would have to be discontinued. And I think, again, there's additional changes we would have to make. It kills me because I've been one of the biggest advocates for this since we pioneered the program during COVID. But the building subs, I know we've looked at proposals. We know that if we eliminate the permanent building sub position, we'll still have to hire substitutes. So it won't be a complete savings. And I know some of you have been very creative and coming up with some solutions where maybe we can keep them in our, highest need schools. But from the information that David Nieder and your staff, you presented last time, if we did phase them out, we could see a savings of about $3.5 million. And as I add all of these up, I think we can do all of those great things. The 4% supplemental pay, a $17.50 non-certified increase, maybe higher, $20 bus driver pay, but with eliminating the extended care support, again, phasing out temporarily until we have more funds maybe next year, the building subs program, I think we can do all of that and come in at under $60 million by the numbers that I have. And I think a budget under $60 million will be better received and much more likely to be funded by the county than one that's significantly over. So, again, I'm one vote. I know we have 9 different opinions, and I think we've heard some ideas in common and we've heard some unique ideas. So I want to throw those out. And then before we get into board discussion, I wanted to turn it back over first to Dr. Taylor for any comments that he has about the proposed budget and what he's heard, and then to Mr. Nieder, and then we'll bring it back for full board discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to say thank you to the board for all of the recommendations and suggestions that we've given. And I think we certainly now understand that what we make and ask is going to be vitally important. I do believe that we have to stay in that $60 million range. The board has talked about the desire to be able to fund those compensation items that are important, other things that we see. I think based on the discussion that you all have, that is where we kind of ride. At the end of the day, you all will still make that final decision about what your ask will be. But I think along with you all, I support increasing the ask over the $58.3 million that I've asked for. But I still believe that the farthest that we might want to go is around that $60 million range. And then that will all end up in terms of what you all feel has to be eliminated in order to achieve those objectives that you talked about. And so everybody has clearly stated and said that compensation is important. And so what I encourage you to do is to make whatever additions or subtractions to make you, help you to meet those standards, knowing that it's going to require some other things in the budget to be done. I also recognize that, as I've heard some board members say, citizens in this community are looking at tax increases in 2 different areas. That's both from the municipalities as well as the county commissioners. And so I know from the county commissioners, they have to leverage that out in terms of what their budget is going to look like. And so showing that we are serious about the ask to the commissioners, but also showing the people in this district that we're serious about compensation, I think speaks volumes. And ultimately, a $60 million ask, if we get there, we'll be able to go back and make adjustments. But the real work, as the chair said, comes after we get that final number. And so I'll add those comments. And Ms. Edmonds, you may have a comment that we can go back.
Unless it's pressing, I'd like to hear from Mr. Nieder first, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And then you'll be the first board member.
I got it, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You ready?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Chair Haggerty. What we would like to do next, there have been a few additional questions that have come in from board members. Just review those with you, just a few. And there was one question that requested additional deeper depth on the org charts that we did not have ready for your last work session. We got that included in the materials today. Just show you what that is. We're not going to review each chart. And then, from what I have heard in the board discussion thus far, or each board member reporting out their priorities and their, I guess, limits, we've done some tallying as you've gone through, so we might be able to, as the board continues discussion and gets alignment around what to include, what to exclude, and I'm oversimplifying a bit, we can tell you what that would then in turn the increased county appropriation request to and give you a number, or a real close number. And one last thing before I turn it over to Ms. Kimsey to briefly review the handful of questions that came in. I'll remind the board that the difficult decisions you're making today are related to what you are asking the commissioners funding for. And I believe it was Ms. Johnson-Hostler who made a comment towards the end of your last work session, something to the effect of, but your real decisions effectively are after the county budget is adopted and after the state budget is adopted. And so whatever decisions the board makes to include in your proposed budget, it will change in all likelihood. So with that, Ms. Kimsey, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. Good afternoon. We just have a few questions this time to go over. We did get a request for the more detailed organizational charts of all the staff in the central services area. We have that highest level organization chart in the superintendent's proposed budget, but there's addendum 1 now in your Q&A that shows all the different organization charts through the different departments for central services. Another question was, what's the dollar amount needed to increase salaries with steps and compression to $18.25 per hour minimum? The cost to increase salaries for non-certified salary grades 17 through 30 to a minimum of $18.25 per hour is $8.8 million. Bus drivers are a separate schedule and are not included in that estimate. And both of those costs are shown on the list of choices that you all were just working through in the 4 different scenarios that we provided. Then the last question was, could you please provide a history of the supplement or a chart that shows when it started and the annual increases over time? Would you also include a side-by-side of the first and 15th year pay over the time frame and a chart that shows what the first and 15th year salaries would be if it kept up with inflation over that same period? So for the response, we've provided some charts and some data. Please keep in mind that these year-over-year comparisons should only be used to look at how the certified schedules have changed over time. They don't reflect what an actual teacher would have experienced from one year to the next. In most of the years over the time, these charts represent the state legislated step increases for certified staff. This would also explain the years that show a slightly negative year-over-year comparison. One way to look at the data, in particular with the step 0 data, is that this shows for teachers entering the profession, the salaries have not kept up with inflation. So a new teacher today has less earning power than that of the past. And then there's several charts and graphs that provide the information requested in that question.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kimsey. So now, we've talked about some target numbers, you've heard from the superintendent and staff, and so now for board discussion, Ms. Edmonds.
I wanted to respond about the helps thing. I agree with Ms. Caulfield that we absolutely cannot lose it. The results are too good. But I remember asking about that, so I looked back at the Q&A from our April 2nd work session, and it was my question. It was question number 3, and helps, by the way, is on page 119 of the budget. So at that time, on April 2nd, staff said that they believe that we can get the funding for 24-25 from federal carryover dollars from Title IV and or DSSF to fund the program. Do you still feel that way, staff, or?
Mr. Cook's here to answer that.
Sure. So first of all, if the superintendent says this is a priority, then we will find the funding to continue the program. I don't know whether it will be specific to Title IV per se, it may be DSSF, but certainly those are allowable uses of those funds. I'd also point out that this has not been a recurring line item in our budget the previous 2 years, and we've been able to fund the program. And Ms. Caulfield, to your point, this would be an expansion because we'd be paying for new tutors to be trained beyond the several hundred that we already have. So again, the other thing that I would point out, it is the 3 to 5 year plan that this will become a community-based, self-sustaining, self-funded program without the need for recurring district funds. And so I think we're confident that for this coming year in 24-25, we'd be able to continue and expand the program utilizing existing funds without it having to be a recurring line item in the budget. If that helps.
Yeah, it does. And I just wanted to say that I had not brought up helps, in our subsequent work sessions because I had felt, comfortable with the response that we got in early April. Because I agree, the results are just off the charts, and it's worth every penny.
And I'll add one more clarification as well. If it was to be a budget line item, we would ask that it not be to reflect helps, because that is the vendor that we would be contracting with for the tutoring. It may be Wake Together, which allows us to be more broad in terms of the application of those funds and not be tied to a single vendor.
Thank you.
Just for clarity.
We have some other people. Ms. Buffett, is this about helps
Yeah.
or something else? Okay, we'll go to you, and then we'll go to Mr.
And
Rashid.
I appreciate you, excuse me, I don't know what's wrong with my throat today. I appreciate you clarifying with the Wake Together, because when I was referring to helps, it was, for me, it's more about tutoring.
Yes, ma'am.
It's about math, it's about, and I know that's not what helps is, I know that's literacy, but those two things for me, from day one of being on the board, has been my number one goal, is how can we help with our academic loss? We know that we've had struggles and they continue to drag on, so how can we help? And this is, these programs are for elementary school, so I would love to see them expand. And my question on the helps part is, how many, with the number that's there, the 485,000, how many of the elementary schools, out of how many we have, is that for?
Yes, so and Michelle may be able to jump in, but I believe it was somewhere around 30 or so schools in 22, 23, and then we expanded the footprint by about the same number of schools in 24, 25. Or excuse me, in 23, 24. And we likely would expand it by about the same number again in 24, 25.
And in this current school year, we have trained in-house trainers as well. We've trained some of our own staff to be able to become trainers as well. So we're just expanding the ability to move forward with that.
Which may allay some future costs to train the same or more tutors in the future.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Mr. Hershey, then Ms. Mahaffey.
I am happy to support option 2 that was presented to us that has the 4%. I did not think there was an appetite to go that high as a final budget number to 63.5 million by so many board members. I think I'd rather make a slightly bigger ask, and if we have to come back and adjust down, I'm okay with that. I think the building subs, the feedback I've gotten is the principals really would prefer we keep them, because they're going to have to otherwise pull staff to cover classes. They've been very successful. There's a lot of feedback that I have received. Is there a huge material difference between 61.8 and 63.6 or so in the grand scheme of 650 to 700 million dollars? I don't really think so, but so I'm happy to support that option 2 and then adjust down if we need to in the future, because I assume we're going to have to adjust at some point anyways.
Ms. Mahaffey.
Yeah, I agree with keeping the building subs. We pushed very hard about the importance of the building subs with the commission last year. We got positive feedback from principals, and it's peace of mind knowing that there's at least one person that they can count on. And we've been told by teachers at some levels that they'd like to be compensated for their time covering their colleagues' classes. And while I agree that that's something that we should explore, we currently don't have a way to track that. And while the building subs can only cover one class, it saves one teacher, one IA, or one administrator from having to take away their valuable time and do that. So I would like to see the building subs remain in. And I strongly believe that this budget, reflects most of our needs and values. Obviously, we have more needs than are in this budget, but I would rather ask and know that we've asked for what we need and know what the answer is than not ask for enough just because we think a number is or isn't, and not know if we could have asked for more.
Okay.
And we can make that adjustment later on.
Thank you. Ms. Russ?
I agree with my colleagues around anything that pertains to staffing, anything that pertains to academic achievement that helps us overall. I still want to echo, I get asking for a big number, but I still caution us to stay with the recommendation that our superintendent has stated, which I'm sure he's done his due diligence with us. I'm a little cautious of, I'm okay with most of what option 2, with some tweaks that we need to do to decrease beyond the 63 million. But I think that's my only concern, is for us to not get too excited in the area of, because we would say, let's do 63. We would say, well, what's really, 64 or 65? And for us to come back with even less than our 60. So I'm hoping that we can get the 60 and work with it, but to ask for greater than that, I'm concerned.
Thank you. Ms. Caulfield?
So, one of the things that I'm just struggling with, it's not so much that we need the things that are on here, because we do. They're on the priority list, they need to be at the top. But each year we keep raising it by quite a bit, significant amount, and it's been brought up many times. We've had emails, we've had people come up. I've had people that say to me, year after year, you're getting more and more money. I'm paying more and more taxes, but it's the same amount of people, same amount of students, and our proficiency scores aren't growing. So that is our main goal, is to do that, is things that will affect our proficiency scores, which means direct support in the classroom. So, we have the HVAC issues. We have, we talked about, student mentor programs, things that we could do to support our teachers also, which requires adult bodies in the schools. We've heard from part-timers that their pay doesn't actually get affected. I'm not really sure that we discussed that number, or if we can discuss that now. We just talked about the helps, having more tutors, teacher aides, like things like that actually help in the classroom. So I was hoping that we could have a little bit more discussion, because last year we approved the amount, and then the county commissioners came back to us, and they gave us their dollar amount, which was pretty close to what we asked for. And it just felt like it was not going more in the classroom, that the classrooms were not seeing more. So, we have a giant book here of all these things that it gets allocated towards. I get it. I understand. There's a lot for us to cover and pay for, and we're a huge, huge district. But I'm just wondering if there is a point that we're going to talk about doing things that we are doing now, if there are ways that we could cut, adjust, or take from Peter to pay Paul. Is that going to be in the discussion at all?
So, since that was directed to me, I'll respond.
Well, I was just looking in your
Yeah,
direction at
yeah.
the board, because everybody's that way.
I think there are some legitimate points in which you said about looking carefully at the budget, but then I think there are some things that I would characterize as overly broad. Okay? So when you make a statement like we should put more back in the classroom, if you look at the numbers and you read this book, you will see, over 90% of all of the funding, closer to what, 90, David, what would you say?
90, I would say 94.
About 94% of those dollars go back into the classroom and the schools. And so to say that every year we spend more and more money and it's not going back in the classroom, I can't agree with that. And
Well,
I
I'm
think the
saying
numbers
it's not
don't
going
agree.
back. I'm saying I would like to see
Yeah.
more support if we're asking for this much more money and we're raising it again. So, Dr. Taylor asked for 58, and we're now talking in this, we're going into the 60s. So I'm just saying, as we raise that number and we're asking this of our constituents to pay for all of this, there are special needs programs and stuff that I don't think that we are addressing as much. We do have mentors and coaches for our teachers, but there's certain areas that we need to have more support for those children there.
Well, and so, again, we're at the special work session before our next meeting where we have to have a budget. And the purpose of this meeting was to bring out specific asks and specific cuts. I will take away from what you said that we can do more budget work through the year and look at some of these things in greater detail. The feedback that I'd gotten is that we would spend more time working on the budget together as a whole group in work sessions. But if you want to bring back the Finance Committee and look at individual things throughout the year, we can definitely do that for the next year going forward. I will say if we do that, I would ask for better board attendance at those committee meetings that we've had, because sometimes we've had those and struggled to have a quorum. But we can take your suggestion and we can do that. Now, I want to hear from some other people who haven't spoken. Dr. Taylor, did you have something to interject?
Yes,
Then I'll go to Dr.
yes, sir.
Green.
So two quick things that when we talk about the connection to student achievement, as we say, 94% of that goes back into the schools. But we do recognize that a lot of that would come out of the state budget, out of the federal budget, is not necessarily tied to the local budget. And so that's really what this work is about, is how we can get this into line. The other thing, just quickly, is that when we talk about student outcomes, I think it's certainly correct, and it's really not about the resources, but about having different expectations of staff that already have these resources. And I think that's what we will get, the results that you're talking about, having different expectations of what everybody does. But absolutely, this is about how we can make those adjustments to this local budget. But you got federal and state that are not being considered. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Dr. Ed.
And I agree. I want to nail it down to concrete numbers. The thing I have a clarified question for you guys is under the page 113 of our book, and in the previous April 16th session, I'm confused about the. There are $13 million in that behavioral health support, but at the same time, you had mentioned in the question and answer that some of those are not filled. Is that number based on filled and unfilled positions?
No, sir, it's just based on filled positions.
Okay, it just didn't. I wasn't quite sure if it was including the unfilled that.
The total number of months are all the positions, filled and unfilled.
Mm-hmm.
The dollar value pretty much represents the filled positions, because we consistently have vacancy rates that hold pretty steady. They have actually improved. We've got a little bit less vacancy than we used to. But they hold pretty true through time. So we never have to budget the full salary and benefits for any group of employees, because we know on any given day, some positions will be vacant.
That is already taken into account in that $13.8 million estimate.
And in terms of actual concrete solutions to try to bring down numbers, I mean, I propose a little bit of it in terms of holding off on the senior admin positions. I know it's not a big amount in the grand scheme of things, but it's a little bit. And we can certainly look at the percentage numbers in terms of the increase. I know Mr. Hershey had a smaller percentage increase in your proposal than some of the others, and I'm amenable to adjusting certain parts of it, but it is still, we are committed to the overall, over the next few years of increasing the certified supplemental pay. So it's just a matter of kind of how fast we can do it, right? So I'm amenable to somewhere kind of where Mr. Hershey was mentioning earlier.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nader?
Well, I just would like to give the board some data for your continued discussion. With option 2, and again, these are just options. They're not recommendations, and any option can have substitutions in it.
Right.
But option 2, as is, which would remove the reduction in parking fees, which would increase the teacher salary supplement by 4%, which would bring classified staff to $17.75 per hour minimum, or 4% minimum. would bring bus drivers to $20 per hour minimum. Would continue flag football, I'm not going to cover every line. Would pre-commit an additional $4 million a year from now of additional funding, but the additional funding being requested along with that is 62.3 million. And if, and your math, Mr. Haggerty, I believe was correct, or your estimate, if the building subs were not all maintained, I believe it's just under 60 million, 59.9.
Thank you, Mr. Nieder. Ms. Edmonds?
Mr. Nieder, I didn't follow that, so you kind of reviewed what I see in option 2, but you came up with 62 something instead of the 63.5 that's shown. So
It's 60, I'm sorry, it is 63.5 million.
okay, so if we remove the building subs, that gets us just below 60?
That would bring it to 59.9.
Okay.
All right. Any further questions or any further discussion? Ms. Rice and then Ms. Mahan.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back and echo with Ms. Cofield, because I feel like I hear my colleague when she's saying we're putting this money together, but we're still not moving the ladder where we desire around student achievement. And so I just want to continue to say, funding our teachers, professional development to help our teachers, dealing with some of these social factors and behavioral support by training our teachers will, again, help us in the student achievement area of where we're trying to go, and utilizing more our equity team to help us in the classrooms around training our staff to be able to help with the improvements of that student achievement so that we can see the use of our dollars in student achievement as well.
Thank you, Ms. Rice. Ms. Mahaffey, did you have a hand?
Yeah, I just want to, reshare my commitment to maintain the building sub-program. And, we often hear the issues with student achievement. And yes, we have a long way to go, and that's why we created the strategic plan that we have. But looking at the data that was provided at our October 4th student achievement meeting, our graduation rate has continued to go up. Our EOG and EOC results have seen increases in most areas, all but 3. All of our subgroups increased in their composite proficiency rates, and 84% of our schools are meeting or exceeding growth at this time. And so by not providing compensation to our teachers and giving them the skills that they need so that they're not worried about their second job, so that they're not tired when they come in to teach because they spend the evening at a hotel overnight doing the night shift or worrying about what their summer job is going to be. I think we can continue to see those rates, but I think, that's why, again, for me, I understand going over a nice round number like 60, it seems hard. That is, $3.5 million is not a small sum of money, but again, maintaining that peace of mind with the building subs to me is important, especially since it was such a crown jewel and something that we held up as we spoke to the commission last year.
Thank you. Did you?
I can wait till
Okay, Ms. Edmonds?
I just have a more of a closing statement, so I
Sure.
can wait. So like if we're still, I can
Okay.
wait.
Well, it seems like a lot of the discussion is coming together around, I think, some common things. And I think I have some next steps or next directions, but Mr. Swanson?
So I understand the importance of our building subs, but I would also like to see if we had to, I'm on board with the proposal that Mr. Nieder just laid out. But I would also like to see what the additional cost would be if we prioritize those building subs in our high-need schools. If we had to get rid of them, put them in those schools that has the most vacancies, that we can pilot and then again bring back the building subs in the upcoming budgets. So I do agree with Mr. Mahaffey on that. I think that that's just a piece I want on a nice little compromise with that.
I appreciate that, Mr. Hirsch.
And to piggyback on that, I think that's a good conversation if we need to, like, and we get that, if we build in an ask that where we include it, we give staff some time, because it's going to be a while before we get the commissioners, but a couple months before they have to have their budget.
No, they'll have their budget work session on May the 23rd.
Okay.
So less than a month from now.
I think they vote on it, though, what, in June, mid-June? Mid-June, they adopt it.
Yeah, so they're statutorily required to do it by 30 June, but I think the practice has been they do it at their first meeting, so we know pretty early on.
By then, we're going to have staff come back to us with some different options, maybe, if we are forced to make some changes.
Well, technically, and Mr. Nader, correct me, Ms. Kimsey, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we would do it then, because then we'd still have the state
That's
budget.
true, yeah.
And we'd probably, rather than going back and changing it once and then having to change it another time,
Yeah,
we'd
that's
probably
fine.
just wait for the state.
That works right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Mr. Nader?
Mr. Swanson, in response to your wonder or your question, not included in option 1 or 2, but the cost is there. I think if it was included in option 4, there would be just over $1 million of savings if we only providing that building level sub in high need schools.
It's that line after that that
That's vacancy.
makes me hesitant. I don't want to see
Okay, I see.
folks lose their job and people not being able to call on somebody that they've grown to rely on over the past couple of years.
Ms. Caulfield?
Just in regards to the subs, I just want to also advocate to keeping that. And I understand trying to save the cost to go to some of the schools that might be more needing it, but I feel like when you're in the need of the subs, it doesn't matter, because then that class also is getting kind of strained by not having them in there. So I don't feel that that's something that we should try and minimize.
Well, let me say, and again, just like as we've heard, I value the building subs. I have championed the building subs, but I firmly believe we're not going to get a budget of $63 or $64 million funded by the county commission. I just don't. And we can make that ask, and we can put it on them to make them tell us no. But as we've heard from our teachers, our educators, after we introduced the superintendent's proposed budget, the top priority that I have heard come back has been compensation. And I think we've all agreed on some good steps to improving teacher compensation. Those steps cost money. And if we prioritize that and do all of these things, it will still increase our budget over what the superintendent has asked. It's just that if you're looking for a way to get that number down to what the county may actually fund, even trying to just leave the building subs in those highest need schools still seems like it's not enough savings. And so I'm putting it out there not because of any criticism of the program or lack of faith in the program. I fully see the value, and I would have thought it would have been a higher priority for staff that had reached out and contacted us. But just in terms of the volume of emails and other communications and things that I've seen, the priority seems to have been that straight compensation. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm critical of that program or don't see the value of that program. I really do. I'm just really trying to find the money to get to where I think, we could get our budget requests funded. And so I know a lot of people have spoken and some have spoken, like that's my second time on it. Really at this point, if I'd like to just take a show of hands. and just see where we are in terms of majority, minority, because it seems like we have some very specific things like Dr. Ng's suggestion on some of those HR things. Sam has had some specific things around Narcan and some others. We have a few things that we maybe don't have consensus on, but I think we could vote on or get there. But the big number, I think, in moving toward a budget right now seems to be the building subs. Does anyone have anything other than the building subs that you think would have an impact on that number of like more than $1 million that we also need to take a vote on? And when I say vote, I'm really just looking for like a thumbs up, thumbs down. It's not like a binding vote, but just to get some direction. You look like you're thinking, Wayne.
Yeah.
What? Oh.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I mean, you had mentioned about that your thought about non-certified was more 1750, and that would lower it by $600,000 right there. It's not $1 million, but we're getting there. Then the HR part, that's another 350,000. So in combination with that, that's $1 million right there.
That's a good point. And so I'm sorry, I shouldn't be going back and forth and using the chair to respond. I think, even though I had said the 3.5, hearing everybody else go higher, I was willing to go higher if we could keep that total number down just by, using that building sub number to bring it down. I could go higher. If we kept the building subs, then I would look at something like what Dr. Eng has suggested, still to try to bring that total number down a little bit. Ms. Evans, did you have a comment?
So I was wondering about keeping the building subs and going to 3.5% for the supplement instead of 4. I do not know that math.
What was your number?
I think it's about
You said
900.
3.
I think it's about $1 million, based on just the numbers, $1 million per 0.5%, like $1 million, $2 million per percentage.
We'll give you the exact number.
Yeah, it's just the ballpark.
But if I may,
Please.
my overarching statement is this one board member is able to justify a larger ask to the county, to the taxpayers, to the county commissioners, including teachers, because we have a teachers union that has given us 4,000 plus signatures that they are asking for the 4%, understanding that it comes with a tax increase. I haven't received 4,000 emails or even 1,000 or even 100 telling me from educators not to raise their taxes. I know that is real, but I'm going on what information I have been provided. And so I have no problem with the option 2, 6.3 ask. I do understand that we may not get that and that we will be back to do this work, and I'm prepared to do that. So that is just I don't have a problem with the asking for what we need. I feel like that is our job. I've said it before, we took an oath to advocate for what we need, and yes, we have to go to the state, and the state is responsible for this, and it's an election year, and everybody needs to be prepared to put people in office at the state level that will fully fund public education. But today, this is what is before me, and I'm going to advocate for what we need. And yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Hershey.
I'm going to second my colleague, Ms. Evans. I'm very comfortable with the ask of option 2 in framing it to the commission that we are a separate body. We have to make our ask, and it's okay, whatever they provide. We're not putting it on them. It's just kind of what our role is, and I don't want to, and I know you didn't mean it in this fashion, but I don't want to give them a say over what we create for our ask. And so I would personally, I know we can go some thumbs up, I can't say that, or down on some things, but I would start with what the support is just straight for option 2 as a kind of a baseline for where we are, because I heard a bunch of people say option 2 and felt like it was the majority of a starting point. And maybe we still include some cuts into that, but kind of as a kickoff spot.
Okay, well, I hear you, and I do appreciate that. I am going to ask for the thumbs up, thumbs down, though, just on the building subs. And then after that, then I think that would leave option two
Yeah.
as sort of the base.
Yeah, that's fine.
For us to go forward. So just, yes, you have a question?
Yeah, question. So with you getting ready to ask us that question, the building subs would determine what dollar amount we're going to be at, correct? Is that meaning this, for me, meaning this, my understanding and intent is we have to find ways to cut everything else, which may mean building subs, as long as I'm going to stay flat-footed on making sure that my staff gets their raises or what they're entitled to, right? And then we're saying the building subs is what we're looking at that may have to be cut to provide the raises. Is that what we're to keep the 4% and the 4? I've always had 4.5 as my highlighted, but we're staying at a base at least 4. Is that what my understanding?
So
I'm just looking for clarity.
I wouldn't describe it that way.
Okay.
I would describe it as that it sounds like we're looking at option 2 with a couple modifications, a couple smaller modifications, but whether or not to include the option 2 funding of building subs, which would have, and I apologize, I have to put my glasses on for it, the $63,570 revised appropriation, or a smaller one that would be about $59,900,000 if we remove the building subs.
Yeah.
So
Significant.
is that,
Yeah.
okay.
No,
So-
I'm
so
saying
now I
it's a
understand
significant
your-
number.
Yeah.
that one-
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so-
that
okay.
one item is that significant on
We're talking
there.
about eliminating
The building subs.
altogether.
Yeah.
Not just only in the homes.
Right. Dr. Taylor.
So to add to what Mr. Haggerty is saying, is that option 2 at 63.5 has the building subs in it. If you eliminate the building subs completely, then the savings that you experience will put you at the 59.9.
And there are other options, such as like what Mr. Swanson had proposed.
Absolutely.
That could bring it from the 63, maybe down to like a 63.5, maybe down to 62 something.
Absolutely, depending on how you decide to
Yeah.
massage that option, absolutely.
But because it's such a significant impact, I was just trying to start there and then see where we were. So,
So,
I'm kind of torn with the ask part. My colleagues made great statements around our responsibility, but still in lieu of understanding that to ask, but understand that we may not get. It's not to infuriate them or make them feel challenged, but it's to say this is what we kind of need to give student success, and then when we get it back, we can make the adjustment accordingly. Perhaps maybe we may not. I know you just talked about the building subs in certain particular schools, but if we can figure out even how to adjust that number to bring it close to what we get after we get a response back of what our actual budget is, I'm hoping that maybe we can look around that, but I'm ready to vote.
all right, yeah, at this point, I really have to call for just what we think to see where we are, because if everybody's on one side of it, I don't want to drag out the discussion.
Is this just on the subs?
This is just on the subs. So the proposal would be if we were to take out the building subs for a year and see, you would see that option 2 number, using option 2 as the base, not including some of these other cuts, but looking at option 2 as the base, whether we would take out the building subs, that would be a savings of about $3.5 million. So anyone in favor of that, give me a thumbs up.
Of getting rid of.
Of getting rid, not of keeping it as is. Okay, so it's just me?
You think completely?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Then I am not going to belabor the point. So at this point then, are we comfortable with looking at option 2 as our baseline? Let me get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. That's sort of a half thumb from Ms. Caulfield, but Otherwise, it looks like option 2 then is our baseline. So then, from option 2, how many people support? I'm just going to go some of the specific ideas I've heard, and then if I haven't said yours, just make sure that I get it in there. Dr. Ng's suggestion of some HR cut, they're not even cuts as much as not funding new positions. All in favor?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, I see at least 5 thumbs there, 6. So then we'll incorporate that one. Other specific changes different than what we have in option 2. Mr. Swanson, did you want to, oh, sorry, Ms.
I just have a
Caulfield?
question. Up at the top, and I guess this kind of goes for option 1, 2, and 3. With the teachers who kind of stop at year 15. So is this saying that we already have in the budget, if I understand this correctly, the $2 million to give them an extra $25 on local increase?
Mr. Nader, I'll let you and Ms. Kimsey address that.
Repeat it.
Yes, sorry. In the first column, it says 2.043 million, and that is referring to the additional supplement increase for the experienced teachers is that for the teachers that are going to
That's if we were to that's if we were to look at step 16 and above and add $25 additional local supplement increase per month, so that you're doing a little bit more for the experienced teachers.
That was to give you
Right.
an option that but in addition to looking at teacher supplement increases for all teachers at all steps, do something beyond that for an increase for those at step 16 and above, because that's where you have 2 plateaus where the state base stays flat. The supplement does increase, but the state base stays flat.
Okay, so that would only give them an additional $300 a year? Or am I misunderstanding that?
Nope, that is correct.
So in option 2, that is not even an option for them?
That is not an option.
That was not included in that line item. It could certainly be added. What was included in
It's
option?
$250. If it's
If it's a
$25 a
10-month
month,
if
as
it's
a
a
10-month
10-month
employee, it'd be $250.
It's
Yeah.
an option 4.
Yeah.
Big ask.
That's separate from the overall percent increase against the total schedule.
Is there another way that we can find to support those teachers?
I mean, that's the purpose of this work session.
I mean, if we have tenured teachers that are dealing with things that are within their classroom that are, we'll call straining, and they're not seeing an increase, I am just afraid we're going to continue to lose those teachers, and they are so vital to teaching our new teachers to come in, and it's just like it's a circle of life. It's so important, and I really feel that we can't ignore that piece.
I mean, I think many of us around the table would be in favor of doing something about that, and I think many of us around the table think it's unfair that the state salary structure caps
Is
those.
set up that way.
Yeah. But again, you see that's another $2 million. So,
And it's only $250 a year.
yeah. All right, Ms. Mahaffey, I see your hand.
Well, in talking about that, and I know the messages we received from many of our teachers was looking at that $18 minimum compensation. I know in the past, when we've seen a savings increase in the first semester, we have increased compensation starting January 1. And so I hope, if these things are not in this budget ask, that we can keep those in mind. If we see a cost savings come up, that we can look at ways that we can implement some of these, for the next calendar year. And just knowing that we've had that flexibility in the past.
Mr. Nieder, you had a comment?
Yeah, just again, for context, just a reminder that any final decisions about compensation schedules are made after final county appropriation is made and after we know what the state is going to do. Right now, we know only what's in the state's second year of the biennial budget. But they can come back, they can go to the legislature and make changes to it. They can increase what was in the second year. So once we have that better information and we know what county funding is going to be, there'll be additional discussion about what any final schedules will be based upon final funding. So you're not making final decisions today.
And just to double ask, sorry, just to make sure I clearly understand it, when the state gives us an increase, it's still not going to affect these teachers that are frozen, based on the point I asked you before, right?
When you say
But
from the
there's-
steps,
Yeah, after
it's
15.
if they make, they could, it could change because the state had even more frozen plateaus in the schedule earlier than it does now. They have passed legislation in the past to remove some of the plateaus. So it's possible they could come back and do that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So I've heard a couple just other comments up here at the table. Rather than going through other individual changes other than, we'd asked about Dr. Ings, and it seemed like there was support for that. I've also heard just a proposal that we go with option 2 as is. I would interpret that to mean plus that administrative change we just heard for those HR professionals. Is that okay?
Can you
Ms.
repeat?
Mahaffey?
Sure.
Okay. So the suggestion was that we would adopt option 2 as presented in Mr. Nieder's materials as the changes in option 2 to the superintendent's proposed budget, plus those not funding the vacant HR positions, and putting that forward as the board's recommended budget.
And that was 300 and something thousand, right?
Right.
That would bring the total request in a potential board's proposed budget to the county commissioners of an increase of $63,214,000.
Okay. Are there any questions about that? Okay, sorry, I
What-
saw your hand.
So, yeah, are you still going to tick through some of the other suggestions that you're not?
No,
Okay.
that's what I'm asking. This is what was suggested in lieu of going through those.
Oh,
So if there is another specific suggestion that you feel strongly about, then we could bring that up. But to just be clear on what we're looking at in option 2, that removes the reduction of the student parking fees. That is a 4% increase to the local supplement for certified staff. That is a 17.75 per hour, 4% minimum increase for non-certified staff. That is a $20 per hour minimum for bus driver pay. That eliminates the extended care support for students. That shifts behavioral support positions, 97 months of employment to Medicaid. That does continue the flag football program, and it does push $4 million, it does defer $4 million in ESSER spending. The only other thing would be the administrative HR position, the vacant administrative HR positions. I don't have that number in front of me, but that's what we would be looking at. Dr. Ing.
I'm just curious if there's an appetite to consider 1750 as opposed to 1775.
I would just say that
Mr. Hershey?
the value that we gain from going to 1775 for the 600,000, I don't think it's worth it to go down for over 600,000 because we're either paying $3.5 million for a 25-cent jump or 4.1 for a 50-cent jump. I just think it's worth it to go to that 775 over 600,000.
I was just throwing it out
I
there.
agree. I know.
In fact, I question why that, to go up from 1775 to 18
I did too.
was like such a big jump in
Yeah.
the cost. I understand, I mean, it's.
Yeah, I did too. I had the same thought, like that doesn't compute in my brain, but I get it.
All right, Ms. Caulfield.
Thank you for recapping that, because that was very helpful. I had so many numbers, it was getting confusing. I just want to ask, in regards to, and I understand what you're saying, if there's any savings, if we can put in certain areas. I hate leaving out the tenured teachers, or we're not tenured, more mature teachers, and not showing them some kind of support. Does anybody have any feedback on providing it for them?
I mean, I thought I had a good suggestion, but I was the only one at the table, so.
Well, I certainly don't want to lose subs that support
Right,
our
I know.
classrooms.
I don't mean to be
pay,
flip.
And
Yeah.
it's fair, because you're going to take from one place to the other, but
Yeah, I'll open that up for discussion and see what people think, if that's something that they want to add or if they want to propose an additional cut. Mr. Hershey?
Well, I was going to say, I think we just kind of follow what Mr. Nieder said, which is we're not really going to set the final funding or the final salary until we get all the budgets, and that could be October or November. So we can ask staff to potentially get creative about additional funding in that area. If there's savings, as Ms. Maffey said, we have savings, we can certainly, and I think the board would be open. I mean, as one board member, I would be open to look into that at the second half of the year, but I'm not going to advocate for any cuts to fit that in at this particular moment.
All right, Ms. Edmonds?
I kind of view that similarly to the master's pay. So the legislature eliminated the master's pay, I don't know what year, 2015, 2017, and it took us until last budget cycle, to reinstate it with local dollars. Should we have had to have done that? No. It's the state's responsibility. They need to reinstate it. I mean, good for us, we got it in Wake County. I'm proud that we did that. But I see that similar to what you're talking about. It is wrong that they plateau, and for so long.
I do
But
agree with
that is a battle that we need to have at the state. And it's not to say we can't, maybe we agree to set that as a goal. But I agree, I'm with Sam, I'm not prepared to offer more cuts in other areas to plug that in.
Yes.
But I'm with you, it is wrong.
I do not understand it. I agree with you. I don't know why you would plateau anybody while everybody else's cost of living is raising, so is theirs. And it's kind of a thankless thing to give them a freeze that they've been so, loyal to us for that many years. So I don't understand it. And I do think that we should kind of push with legislation to change that. And I don't see anything on this page that we're looking at that could cut, because that takes away directly from the classroom.
Now, I will say that while I feel the state should take care of this, if this is something that we were able to fund local funding for in future years, it can be a good recruiting tool, because it shows Wake County values veteran teachers. And as some teachers that might be living in Wake County or near Wake County choose to work outside of the county, if we show that we can value them, that could help us with our vacancies by providing more compensation for those veteran expert teachers that we have out there. So it'd be nice if the state funded. If the state didn't fund, I think we could still use it to our advantage, but it doesn't sound like there's the appetite to do that in this budget unless I'm reading the table incorrectly.
And while the state does control what they give us, I just feel that we control what we give our teachers. So I hope we find a way to do that.
Thank you. All right, are there any other, is there any other discussion, any other ideas, any other direction? Otherwise, we'll take what's been discussed here, give it to Dr. Taylor, and he will direct staff to prepare the board's proposed budget for the 24-25 school year. Going once? Going twice? All right, so I think the intent is that once it is compiled, we will get a chance, obviously, to look at it before our full meeting, and we will add it to, Ms. Emmons was an executive today, the plan is to add it to our work session, not for a lengthy discussion, but just to go through, make sure that what you see is consistent with what we talked about today. And then that would be on the agenda for a vote at our board meeting on the 7th. Mr. Nader.
And I just want to be explicitly clear that we understand. It's our understanding then that the board would like us to, with the starting point of the superintendent's proposed budget, make all of the changes that are reflected in this option 2 and make one additional change, and that would be to remove the 3 new additional HR positions that were being requested and remove those from and then that with option 2 and the removal of those 3 HR positions would be proposed for your board's proposed budget.
That is, as I understand it, does anybody have an alternative understanding? I want to make sure we're all clear.
And
Ms. Rice.
And just to make clear, with the option 2, I know that we looked, because my only concern is when we just say completely option 2, it's not reflecting the concerns that we've addressed. I think we're saying that option 2 reflects as closely as what we all have expressed.
No,
We're saying-
that is not what we're saying.
What are we
What
saying?
we're saying is that we're going to have a budget book that looks like this, that has numbers that reflect the numbers you see before you in option 2, plus Dr. Ng's amendment. And it says nothing beyond that about any additional movement or flexibility, or we'll look at this or we'll look at that. All we're doing is adopting a very specific tool, the budget.
And then just I wanted to make sure, so the extended care support, or that's going to be included in the budget?
No,
Option 2?
according to the document
Okay.
and
The funding for
the
that
summary
would come
that we
out.
read,
Okay,
that would be
that's what I want to make sure,
eliminated.
okay.
Okay?
All right.
Yeah, it's, the only thing that's not listed there is what Dr. Ng had suggested.
Okay.
And you should see that on the budget materials from our previous work session. I believe, Dr. Ng, is that where you had seen it proposed originally?
Right.
Yes. And I think I have it pulled up.
But we've chose the 17.75%? Okay, all right, I'm good with that. That's all that matters.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure we have clarity and everyone's, okay. All right, so then with that direction, Mr. Nieder, do you have any questions, or does anyone on your staff have any questions? The other changes we would make are going to be mostly cosmetic. What we'll do is that we'll prepare a letter from the board that replaces the superintendent's letter, and then the document you had our old legislative agenda. We will replace that with the new legislative agenda that we've adopted, and that would go in there.
And I believe the board did also request that we update a page that shows comparisons of the per pupil expenditures in Wake County to other districts, and you had a good suggestion, and we will reflect that in the board's proposed budget.
Thank you.
And then we will make these changes, push them out so you have the opportunity to see them well in advance of your meeting a week from today. And at your work session, we'll re-review it with you. We'll also review with you what we will ask you to take action on a week at your board meeting a week from today. And I'll just here remind the board there would be 2 action items on your agenda, and we'll discuss them both in your work session. One would be for you to waive board policy, I believe it's 8101, which directs the board to put no more than 50% of available fund balance towards balancing a future year's budget. Because what will be included in this proposal based upon where we are is over 50%. We will ask you to waive policy. And then after that, assuming the board waives policy, we would ask you to approve a proposed budget.
And then just for clarity, so that everyone understands the process, after we approve, and I know you know this, after the board approves the budget, and we send it to the county commission, and we see what that funding is, when July 1 comes, we might not actually have a state budget passed. So what would the process be, and what could employees and staff expect in terms of any changes in their compensation?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Haggerty. And I don't know that I recall in my time here where we have had a state budget in place by June 30th. The commissioners have very consistently approved a final budget in June. But because we likely will not have a state budget We won't know what our state funding is. We won't know what final state legislative changes related to compensation are. We will likely ask the board at your second June meeting to adopt an interim budget, and that allows us to continue to operate effective the new fiscal year, July 1, but without any substantive changes to the current, or the current year, which at July 1 will be the prior year. And then only after the state finalizes a budget, finalizes compensation changes, and staff brings any recommendations back to you to reconcile all that. And then the board goes through discussion, just as you had in your last 3 work sessions, to finalize adjustments to your proposed budget and finalize salary schedules based upon available funding. And I'll put a little bright spot out here. It's possible, and this has happened a couple times in recent past, that the state has actually legislated final compensation changes higher than what either we estimated or what they had in the second year of their biennial budget. And in some cases, that actually creates a local savings, which then could be used to fill a gap between what's in your proposed budget and what the final county appropriation is, or potentially even to put towards something like Ms. Caulfield, potentially a couple $1 million towards addressing the advanced teacher steps. But those are all question marks.
So if everyone's clear on the process, what we'll do is we will go ahead and we will end our work session. We will see you all back up. Dr. Ng?
Oh, I just wanted to make sure I emphasize, that I really want to see a study in the future.
Thank you, because this was something we did want to bring up, and with all of the focus on the final document, we forgot to bring this up. I know Mr. Hershey had some comments on that as well. You had some comments. Do you want to talk a little bit more specifically about what you were looking at? And then Sam, I know you had something to say on it too, I think in support of that.
Right. Basically, I just want to make sure that we are utilizing our staff effectively, efficiently. And so if there is a third-party study that can help us analyze that and see where the needs are, maybe perhaps there's even more need than we even estimate, but certainly we need to have a third party to take a look at that more so that we can look at our operational efficiency.
Thank you. And Mr. Hershey?
So what I talked to Mr. Swanson about and to Chair Harry about is making a motion at the next board meeting to coincide with the passing of the budget that ensures that we have both the market pay study and the organizational structure study to us before the next budget cycle. And I don't know if we need to put a specific date on it or not, but just to ensure that we have it, and so we are showing the public that we are responding.
And so there'll be additional information to get, just talking to staff about, for example, I think they were already putting together an RFP for a study, making sure that these concerns are reflected in that, if there's any changes, and then how that impacts the schedule.
Yeah.
But it is something that it's coming. We don't have all the details yet, but just if that, because it's directly tied to this discussion, I thought it was appropriate to add at the end.
Great.
Okay.
And that will likely be 2 separate studies. One is really looking at the organizational structure and the numbers of staffing. And then the other is looking at levels of compensation related to staff.
2 different issues.
2 different.
And just making sure, because the original study, I don't know if it looked at both sides.
It did not.
Okay. All right then. I know that many board members also have a scheduled panel later today. Because we're ending at this point, we might be able, if it's convenient with staff, to start that a little bit early and then maybe get everyone home a little bit earlier too. But we'll explore that after this. All right? If there's no final thoughts, we're done. Thank you very much, everybody.